see and hear me and you've completed your tax filing. If you have any issues with your audio or video connection, please email Conti or Lynn. This is an all virtual meeting, and I will briefly go over how I plan to conduct the meeting. Also, this meeting is being live streamed on the TPB's YouTube channel. We'll start with a excuse me. We'll start with a roll call of members participating in the meeting and confirm that we have a quorum. After that, we'll have staff summarize comments received from the public. And when we get into the agenda items, I'll have the presenters complete their briefing. And if it's an action item, I'll make a motion to adopt the resolution and ask for a second. After that, I'll invite questions or comments from members by jurisdiction. Members who wish to be recognized, please use the raise hand icon on the WebEx and staff will help me call on you. After discussions on the motion, I'll call for a vote. For the vote, I'll just ask for nays and abstentions and take everybody who doesn't say nay or abstain as a yes. If the item is for information only, I'll follow the same process, except there won't be a motion or a call for a vote. Also, when you speak, please state your name and jurisdiction. So Lynn, with that, will you please call the roll?
Yes, great, no problem. Thank you. So welcome everyone. I'm going to state the name of your jurisdiction. If you could state your name, we'll capture your attendance. So starting with the District of Columbia, District Council Charles Allen. District Council Christina Henderson. I saw Heather Edelman here. District Council Matt Fruman.
Present.
Thank you. District Office of Planning.
Rebecca Schwartzman, present.
Thank you. District Department of Transportation.
Meredith Soniat, present.
Thanks. Moving on to Maryland, City of Bowie. Charles County. City of College Park.
Denise Mitchell, present.
Thank you. Frederick County. I saw Bert. He is standing in for Mark Mishler, who left. So we do have Frederick County represented. City of Frederick.
Michael O'Connor, present.
Thank you. And Zach Kirshner, I saw you too, City of Frederick. Thank you. City of Gaithersburg.
Hi, Neil Harris is still here.
Thanks, Neil. City of Greenbelt. I know Miss Weaver was going to be a little late. Not sure if she's joined yet. City of Laurel. Montgomery County Executive.
Corey Pitts, present.
Thanks, Corey. Montgomery County. Prince George's County Executive. Prince George's County.
Eric Olson from County Council. Thank you.
Thank you. City of Rockville. City of Tacoma Park.
Amy Westlick, present.
Thanks, Amy. Maryland House of Delegates. Maryland Senate. They're just finishing up. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Jeff Anderson, present.
Jeff. Moving on to Virginia, City of Alexandria. Arlington County.
Dan Mallett is here.
Thanks, Dan. City of Fairfax.
Tom Peterson here.
Thank you. Fairfax County.
Walter Alcorn's here.
Thank you. Anyone else from Fairfax County? City of Falls Church. I know Dave Snyder said he'd be a little late, so we'll keep our eye out for him. Loudoun County.
Vice Chair Mike Turner's here.
Great, thank you. Anyone else from Loudoun County? All right, City of Manassas member Luna, Miss Luna.
Sonia Vázquez Luna, presente.
Thank you. And City of Manassas alternate Ashley Hudson.
Present, thank you.
Great, thanks. City of Manassas Park. Prince William County.
Megan Landis, present.
Great, thank you. Virginia House of Delegates.
Delegate David Reed, present.
Thank you. Virginia Senate.
Senator Jennifer Boysko here.
Great, thank you. Virginia Department of Transportation.
Bill Cutler, present.
Thank you. Moving on to WMATA.
Allison Davis, present.
Great, thanks, Allison. Our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration.
Janine Ash, present. Thank you.
Thanks, Janine. Federal Transit Administration.
Hey, David Schilling's here.
Thank you, David. National Capital Planning Commission. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority.
Glenn Warren, present.
Great, thanks, Glenn. And National Park Service.
Hi, Laurel Hammack is here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Laurel. That concludes roll call. We have a quorum. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Lynn. Now back to Lynn again for a report on public comments.
And another month where we have received no public comments. Thanks, Neil.
All right, we must be living right. So next is approval of the March 18th meeting minutes. We've been provided with a written summary. I trust we've had a chance to review them. I move that we adopt the minutes of the March 18th meeting as provided. May I have a second?
I second.
Was that Matt?
Yes, it was.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Are there any corrections or additions to the meeting minutes? All right, let's take the vote. Are there any nays or abstentions? Okay, the minutes are adopted as provided. Thank you. For the technical committee report, we've received a written summary of the April 3rd meeting. I'll ask Dan Melliff, the chair of the technical committee, if he would summarize the meeting's outcome for us. Dan, take it away.
Indeed. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. At our April 3rd meeting, the technical committee covered 3 items that you'll see today during the board meeting. First, we received a briefing on Bike to Work Day, which is always a fun event and helps to show people how easy it is to commute by bike or even just to bike to the metro. We secondly received a briefing on the DMV Moves work plan, which continues that excellent work. You'll see that in just a few minutes. And third, we received a report on the status of the federal transportation reauthorization
Thank you all.
So much of our work is dependent on federal funding and federal rules that, of course, there's keen interest in keeping abreast of how that process is evolving. And we really appreciate TPB doing a lot of that work for us and keeping us updated. We also discussed a couple of items that aren't coming to the board today. First, we received a briefing on the FY 2026 Congestion Management Process Technical Report. This plan satisfies one of those federal rules that collectively define much of our work and that the reauthorization is important to. This particular report is intended to provide data on congestion so that we can develop policies to manage it. Without turning this into a whole agenda item for that report, one key takeaway was that only about 20 to 25% of regional congestion is due to recurring causes alone. And signal issues and incidents are actually the greatest contributors. So that was just an interesting outcome. This report will be, excuse me, I'll continue. This report will be submitted to the federal government in June, satisfying that requirement. Second, the technical committee was briefed on TPB's policy framework, which gave us a glance into how all of the performance measures that we're always talking about here support TPB's long-term planning and goals. So that's certainly an important piece of the process. Finally, the committee heard shorter updates about the trip plan that you'll see shortly, the air passenger survey, ADA website compliance issues, and other technical matters. And that concludes my report. Thank you. Are there questions?
Neil, you're on mute.
Mr. Chair, you may be on. I don't see any questions for Dan online.
Neil's probably having issues.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Chair, we are still not able to hear you. Okay, if you want to sign back in, Mr. Fruman, do you want to get us to the next item?
I'm sorry. So are you saying that I should pick up?
Yes, I think we're requesting Mr. Harris to resign. He's having some technical issues. We are working on it. Meanwhile, if you want us to move
Okay,
ahead.
so to the technical committee, is that right?
Yeah, we just finished that.
Okay. We have a written summary of the April 9th, 2026 meeting. I asked Tim Davis, Chair of the committee, to review the report for us. Tim?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman Harris, when you come back virtually. It's my pleasure to present today the CAC's monthly report. The CAC held a virtual and in-person meeting on April 9th. We received a comprehensive update on the status of DMV Move's work plan and TPB's regional safety activities. The CAC is pleased to learn that the DMV Moves is moving towards implementation with tangible milestones for the regional bus priority network, regional service guidelines, fare policies, bus stop amenities, and joint procurement. We continue to support local jurisdictions' endorsements for full funding efforts. The CAC engaged in a lively discussion on the activities local jurisdictions are taking to address roadway safety. TPB staff provided an overview of the efforts to date and a summary of the white paper completed on automatic traffic enforcement. Members observed who is involved in the collaboration and whether broadening the effort would be beneficial. For instance, they noted that insurance companies and self-driving car companies appear to be less engaged, and this would be somewhere we could get a lot of data from. We also discussed trade-offs between engineering solutions and driver behavior. Effective communication about automated traffic enforcement is a crucial concern. Since members are at the center of this debate, communicating the value of ATE is essential. The explanation of where and why ATE is used in different jurisdictions was helpful, and I call your attention to the report in the discussion regarding Virginia and their seatbelt law. We concluded the meeting with our Act Locally round robin, a quick update on recent presentation of the Freight Subcommittee on the Long Bridge Project, a brief on Maryland's efforts to encourage community members to get involved in their own micromobility initiatives, including safety guidance and e-vehicle maintenance. I invite TPB members to read the CAC report for more details about our discussion. That concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thanks, Tim. I'm back. Sorry about that. WebEx decided to freeze up on me. Anyway, are there any questions for Tim from any jurisdiction? All right, hearing none. Thanks, Tim, for the report.
Thank you,
Next
Mr.
up-
Chairman.
Next up is the steering committee actions and report of the director. We have a written report from Conti Streetcount, our staff director. Conti, will you please review for us?
Yes, thank you. And I would also like to note that Vice Chair Mr. Agude just joined us in person. We are glad to have him here, so you can keep order with the staff here. So, I'll just briefly review the contents of my report. The steering committee met on April 3rd and approved an update to the Virginia's critical urban freight network, and it also approved 3 amendments to the FY26 through FY29 TIP. With regards to the critical urban freight network, the federal regulations allow each of the states to define a certain mileage of its roadway network as critical freight network. Virginia had previously established such a network and the TPB had approved it. VDOT recently sought to make 2 changes to this network. One was to remove a few miles of this critical urban freight designation from roadways that are no longer in the TPB urban area. They were when it was approved, but after the 2020 census, that area is no longer in the TPB urban area, so they are proposing to remove it. And then there's another segment which was a standalone segment and was not part of any other contiguous roadway segment that they proposed to remove the designation. And the details are on pages 5 through 6. Vice Chair Fruman had a couple of questions during the steering committee on the impact or on what these changes meant. And VDOT has provided the responses to the questions. One of the questions was this reduction in mileage in the TPB area, was that being used in some other part of the state? And the brief answer is no. This mileage is limited to the urban areas only, and there are other urban areas in the Commonwealth of Virginia beyond the TPB's area, but this mileage is not being used somewhere else. Overall, the total number of mileage that Virginia has to designate as critical urban freight corridors is underutilized, and therefore there will be opportunities should additional facilities merit this designation. And also VDOT notes that this change in designation, either adding the designation or removing it, does not change the funding formula for urban freight projects. It just makes those facilities eligible for other design and funding considerations. Now, moving to the amendments, the first amendment was approved at the request of the District Department of Transportation, and that amendment added about $78 million to a citywide program, two programs, the Highway Safety Program and the Surface Transportation Block Grant. And the money being added to both of these programs is not for any individual project, but it is for that bucket of funding which will be used to fund many projects in the coming years. The second TIP amendment was at the request of Maryland Department of Transportation and Frederick County and Charles County. Two bridges in Charles County are receiving $750,000 each for some preliminary engineering work. There's another bridge in Charles County that is also getting $750,000 for preliminary engineering. And then there are some pedestrian and safety improvements along St. Barnabas Road in Maryland that gets about $2.6 million. And two other funding programs statewide. The Small Urban Transit System gets about $4.4 million. And the Bridge Inspection, Rehab and Replacement Program gets about $22 million. And lastly, the amendment also replaces about $1.1 million in Department of Defense funds with US DOT funds for some intersection improvements on Maryland 355. The last amendment was at the request of Virginia Department of Transportation, which added about $14.4 million in regional STP, NVTA, and state funding for the preliminary engineering phase of the Route 7 widening project in Loudoun County. And the details of that are on pages 45 through 49. With letters sent and received, we received three very special and priced letters, I would say. The first is from US DOT, Federal Highway and FTA, that approved the TPB's budget and work activities for FY27. So we are all set with the federal approval to begin our work starting July 1. And two other letters. One is again from US DOT, Federal Highway and FTA, and the other one is from US EPA. And those two letters approved the TPB's Metropolitan Transportation Plan Visualized 2050 that the board adopted in December, and also the FY26-29 TIP and the air quality conformity analysis. As a side note, I will say that while getting these approvals is very important, getting these approvals in such a short amount of time, we submitted this document in around March, and to get this turned around so quickly, especially Visualize 2050, which was a complete redo of the plan that took us almost 2 years of work and a lot of effort from all of your staff. It really speaks to the federal highway and FTA's opinion on the quality of our long-range plan, and please convey our thanks to all of your staff who did a lot of work over a 2-year period. Moving on to updates and announcements, we your staff, we are out in the field conducting 2 surveys. One is at the airports, BWI, DCA, and Dallas, of passengers coming and going. We do this at the request of the airports. And the information here is used for our continuous airport systems planning work and as well as for our travel demand model. And the second survey is something that the TPB does. It's the regional travel survey, where we survey households and we ask them to provide details of all of their travel during an entire day. This is critical for the TPB's travel demand model, for our cooperative forecasting work, for our air quality work. TPB used to do this work once every 10 years, but we've recognized that travel patterns and choices are changing much more frequently. So we've decided to do this once every 5 years. So this is our first time that we are doing it mid-decade. So the survey instruments have gone out. Households will be rewarded with $5 to $10 per person if they fill this. So please do encourage your constituents, should they get a survey, to fill it. Should you get a survey, I'm sure you'll be thrilled, and I would be very happy if you would fill the surveys as well. Lastly, Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation is accepting public comments on its 6-year improvement program, which is really their funding document for the next 6 years. There's a virtual meeting on May 27th at 5:30. And then there'll be another meeting in Northern Virginia earlier, that's on May 19th. And the details of all of these sessions are on page 65 of my report. So that concludes my review of my report, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions on these or on other matters.
All right, are there any questions for Conti?
Bill Cutler, discussion.
Bill Cutler from VDOT probably has his hands.
Hi, I appreciate the comments. I just wanted to add a comment that on to Hari's, as he said in the report, in Conti's report. May 19th, the Commonwealth Transportation Board local members, the commissioner and secretary will be at Hotel AKA in the northern part of Old Town Alexandria for our spring 6-year plan meetings. That will also coincide with May 19th and 20th at the same location for Commonwealth Transportation Board Travel Day. They've not been up here since in 2.5 years. So I just wanted to make sure that all of our members, particularly those in Virginia who might have an interest, were aware of those. So thank you for the opportunity to highlight that.
All right, thanks. Are there any more questions or comments? All right, thank you, Conti. Moving on. Next item is chairman's comments. I'm going to keep it very brief. I just noted that the technical committee had a report on the congestion management process. I'm wondering if at some point in the next several meetings that the TPB could have a report on where things stand in highway congestion and what's being done to alleviate it going forward. That's something I hear from my constituents more than anything when I tell them I'm active in transportation.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have started looking at the agenda items for the May meeting, and we anticipate providing the board a detailed overview of the TPB's congestion management process and the various components of it.
Okay, we need to get it fixed, okay?
Okay, yes, sir.
All right, optimism. All right, next up is Bike to Work Day proclamation. It's that time of year, folks, to be out and about on our bikes. There's no vote needed. This is a consent item where we will be proclaiming May 15th as a Bike to Work Day. I'm glad to invite Zachary Baldwin, the chair of the region's Bike to Work Day Steering Committee, to give us a briefing on what's planned for the event this year. Zachary, you have the mic.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Zachary Baldwin from the Southwest Business Improvement District here in DC. And it was time for Southwest to have representation as the chair. So I'm the chair of the Regional Bike to Work Day Committee for 2026. So the Bike to Work Day Committee is organized by TPB's Commuter Connections Program in partnership with the Washington Area Bicyclists Association, or WABA. The committee has more than 250 members, which makes it probably COG's largest. Next month, May, is National Bike Month. And the day that we're proposing to hold Bike to Work Day, May 15th, is a Friday and is the culmination of the end of Bike to Work Week. Through this event, we celebrate bicycling. We celebrate it as healthy, we celebrate it as environmentally beneficial, and we celebrate it as practical for the thousands of commuters throughout the capital region. Bike to Work Day works in concert with the mission of Commuter Connections, which is to promote and facilitate sustainable methods of commuting instead of driving alone. With bikes welcomed on transit and the ubiquity of bike sharing, both public and private, bicycling fits well to support the first mile, last mile aspect of multimodal commuting. This year will be the 25th anniversary of Bike to Work Day. Started as a single stop in DC, now boasts over 100 pit stops throughout the capital region. The pit stops are hosted by local jurisdictions, as well as a variety of like-minded nonprofit organizations, companies, and volunteers. Commuters register for the pit stop of their choice and are given a t-shirt when they arrive. Anyone who registers is placed into a regional bicycle raffle, and just about all pit stops offer free refreshment and swag too. The Southwest Bid pit stop will offer coffee. I believe we're offering snacks. And if you come this year, we have duck-shaped bike bells. So while supplies last, I encourage you to come by the Southwest Bid on 4th Street in Southwest. Cyclists can ride solo, they can ride with friends, but now they can also join a bike convoy. The convoys are led by experienced bike commuters, and they're helpful for either new bike commuters or people who are curious about bike commuting by providing comfort in numbers. At your Bike to Work Day pit stop, guests might include elected officials, many of whom are on this call, who support bicycling, as well as law enforcement officers on bikes. And the stops may offer complimentary tune-ups or demonstrations on how to place your bike on the front-mounted rack of a bus. The Commuter Connections takes the lead on the regional event promotion for Bike to Work Day, generating colorful marketing materials, including our official T-shirts. Do we announce the color of the shirts already? Sure. Yeah, so we're doing purple this year. Not too surprising from the graphics design. Commuter Connections also takes the lead on the graphic design, and I think they did a really beautiful job this year. Commuter Connections conducts a sponsorship drive to supplement the costs of the T-shirts. In addition, they develop a video, a radio spot, and social media content to promote the event. And this year, there's a new Bike to Work Day website, which lists all 107 pit stops by both state and jurisdiction. The site has details about each, including mapping and what activities to expect. Last, Commuter Connections supplies resources for pit stops, such as bike guides and regional bike maps, which if you do bike, the regional bike map's super helpful, and offers incentives to bike commuters through the Commuters Cash App. At this time, the board is asked to proclaim May 15th as Bike to Work Day throughout the National Capital Region. This proclamation supports regional cohesion around a focused event date, generates media awareness, and inspires TPB member jurisdictions to hold similar proclamations. TPB members are also encouraged to register for Bike to Work Day and attend the local pit stop of their choice. Thank you, and we hope you can join us in celebrating Bike to Work Day and supporting cycling all year round.
All right, thanks, Zachary. Are there any questions from any jurisdiction? All right, I'm pleased to say that Gaithersburg is holding 2 pit stops, one in the morning, about half a block from where I'm sitting right now, and the other in Old Town in the afternoon. We always get great turnout and flying refreshments and all sorts of giveaways. Hopefully you folks are as well. So now I appreciate Zachary and his team's work, as well as our staff at Commuter Connections for working on this important project. With the unanimous consent of the board, I hereby proclaim May 15th, 2026 to be the National Capital Region's Bike to Work Day, and request all my colleagues to consider having your jurisdiction adopt a similar proclamation, and importantly, to go to bike at the nearest pit stop and meet your constituents biking to work. I don't need to sign anything, right?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right, just making sure. All right, next item is item number 8, trip prioritized project list annual update. That's the last action item for today, approving an update to the list of prioritized transportation resilience projects. Catherine Raynone will review the updates proposed. Catherine, please take it away.
Thank you, Chair. And my husband's a bike commuter, so I hope I can convince him to ride his bike all the way from Capitol Hill to Walter Reed National Medical Center, NSA Bethesda. So it's a long commute for him, but hopefully he'll be able to do it. Okay, so you all heard from me last month. I'm going to give a slightly abridged version of the same presentation just as a reminder of what we're talking about, because it's been a month since you heard from me. So I'm just going to review what the Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan's prioritized project list is. So just briefly, while the region's transportation system was built originally to withstand a broad range of weather conditions, specific resilience projects are needed to increase system resilience to the increasing frequency and severity of extreme weather and natural hazards that our region experiences. A key intended outcome of the Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan, or the TRIP, that was adopted by the board in 2024 was the identification of priority regional resilience projects. The TPB collaboratively engaged member agencies in this effort and conducted a project solicitation process for project submissions to include in the TRIP. As required by PROTECT, which is the federal highway grant program that created the concept of a resilience improvement plan, regional agencies prioritize projects to submit using vulnerability assessment results, online mapping tools, and other local resources to determine the most impactful projects for them to submit. Local jurisdictions and member agencies then submitted a project information form with their project details, including location, specific transportation asset, and which resources were used to identify the project as a priority resilience investment. And while the PROTECT program is currently on pause at the moment, if it does come back and a project is funded through the discretionary grant program, the project will receive a reduced local match requirement if the project is included in the TRIP's prioritized project list. And any priority projects that receive funding from a federal grant will go through the same process that all the rest of the projects go through by being added to our TIP. So quickly, what's in this project list? These are just two charts that show the distribution of types of natural hazards that are addressed in the project list and the distribution of the types of assets that are proposed to be improved in each project. I'm not going to go into detail on this. The list is included in your meeting materials. I will review the TRIP update timeline. We do this update every year, and this is just an overview of the timeline of those previous updates. So in the summer of 2024, the TRIP and the prioritized project list in its initial form were approved by the TPB board and eventually after that, our Federal Highway Division representative. After the PROTECT NOFO was announced in November of 2024, we began the process of collecting projects for that first annual update of the prioritized project list in effort to capture as many projects as possible to be eligible for that discretionary grant program that had the deadline of February 24th, 2025. As I mentioned last time, a few weeks before that deadline, Federal Highway announced a review of the PROTECT Notice of Funding Opportunity, and it was removed from grants.gov. But again, I'm hopeful that it will come back in the next couple of months, maybe year, while the program is currently still under review now. I've heard that it may open up again soon. At the end of 2025, we began the process of collecting projects for inclusion in this 2026 update, which is what I'm talking to you about today. And I'm presenting to you a few new additions and a few updates to this list for approval. So the two projects that were previously on this list that are updated are shown here. Both of them are WMATA projects. The first one on this list isn't just an updated title to the project. And the second is updated to note that a project that was previously included in the list has already been funded and work is underway and currently on track for completion. I love having updates like that because then it means we are moving ahead with resilience projects in our region. And then on this slide, we have the 2 new projects that have been added to the list. I'm excited to say that they represent 2 new localities that hadn't submitted projects to the TRIP in the original instance of it. So it's great that we're expanding our reach. The first is the Cherrywood Lane Complete and Green Street retrofit submitted by the city of Greenbelt, which is proposed to address both the impacts of flooding and extreme heat. And the second is the Columbia Pike Stormwater Improvements Project submitted by the Arlington County Department of Environmental Services, which is a project intended to increase stormwater collection capacity to reduce the impacts of severe flooding. In your mail out materials was the resolution on a memo, as well as these 4 projects in their own little area to show you which ones were updated, and then the full updated project list for your approval. And that was all included in the resolution, which we are requesting for approval on our 14-2026, which is the annual prioritized project list update. That again is the approval of the addition of 2 projects and the 2 updated projects to the approved prioritized project list included in the National Capital Region Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan, or TRIP. And so that is the end of my remarks today, and I will pass it back to the chair.
All right, thanks, Catherine. First of all, I move that we adopt resolution R14-2026 to approve the updates as detailed in the staff presentation to the Transportation Resiliency Improvement Plan document. May I have a second?
Second. Ms. Aguirre here seconded it.
All right,
Thank
thank you. The motion has been made and properly seconded. Are there any questions for Catherine from any jurisdiction?
I don't see any hands
All right,
raised.
that's great. So now for the vote, are there any nays or abstentions from any jurisdiction? All right, the motion has been made and seconded and passed. Thank you. Catherine, you can actually keep working.
Thank you very much. I'll be back next year for another update.
All right, we appreciate that. All right, next item for now on the informational items, we have the DMV Moves Work Plan. If you remember back in January, we agreed to a request from COG's DMV Moves Task Force to assist the region develop the implementation plan for achieving greater coordination in the service design and delivery of multiple transit regions and systems in the region. The resolution we adopted asked staff to begin work on this and brief us on the work plan. Here we have our staff people, Tom Harrington and Eric Randall, who will review the work plan. Tom, take it away.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Harrington, TPB Multimodal Planning Program Director, and joined by Eric Randall, TPB Transportation Engineer and Manager of our DMV Moves program. As you mentioned, today we'll be providing an update on the DMV Moves initiative. When we met with TPB in January, the TPB endorsed the DMV Moves plan and took on the role as coordinator of the DMV Moves implementation. And that came on the heels of November. We had the COG and the Metro boards endorsing the DMV Moves plan. But as we talked about in January, in some ways the November action, while it was the end of one process, it was really the beginning of the hard work of implementation. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And as we also talked about in our March meeting where we presented our UPWP work program, DMV Moves is now a significant work program item for us as we move forward on implementation. Next slide. Over the past few months, TPB staff working with through COG have been out doing presentations on DMV Moves, and the region has endorsed the DMV Moves plan. In fact, really across the whole region, many of the jurisdictions have endorsed the plan. In parallel, there's been the effort of securing the funding that's called for in the plan for Metro. Unfortunately, the Maryland bills were not successful, and in Virginia, the budget process is at the moment, moving towards an April 23rd special meeting. In both cases, we expect those to continue to be priorities as we move into next year. While the efforts on securing funding is underway, the TPB staff and our colleagues at Metro have begun working on one aspect of the plan, which is, there we go, the plan for regional transit integration. And as we've talked about in prior meetings, the transit integration plan is broken into 6 areas, each covering different aspects of the transit experience and different parts of transit operations. So today's presentation will really talk about our work plan, primarily focusing on this year, but then looking even beyond this year. Before we get into that, Eric's going to kind of walk us through that work plan. I thought it was important to step back and talk about why it's important to have a regional integration plan. So when surveys are done of transit riders and people are asked what are the obstacles to riding transit, frequently it's information about transit service and it's access to bus stops. But that barrier of that first time you get someone on transit, it's often not being sure about when the bus arrives, where you go to pick up the bus, how do you pay for the bus when you get on it. And those are barriers to use. The other thing that we've talked about before is in this region, we have a complex transit network with 14 operators. And so if you figure out how to ride on one operator, it may be a totally different process when you go to a different operator. So in the DMV Moves Transit Integration Plan, the vision is a system in which you can move across our region and the customer will find the information they need on when bus service arrives. They'll have clear and consistent ways to pay for transit across the region. When you arrive at a bus stop, what you'll find there will be consistent throughout the region in terms of signage and the bus stop facilities. Across the region, we're working towards fast, frequent service, particularly in some of the priority corridors in the region where we want to really make sure that we're providing reliable bus service. And so, that's really what we're doing here. And I think we've got to keep that in mind as we move forward with implementation. So with that, I will hand it off to Eric and he will walk us through the work plan.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm the engineer. I'm going to dive a bit into the nuts and bolts and how this actually gets done. So I hope you'll bear with me as I go through each of the 6 action areas. But first thing we had to do was figure out how to organize this whole effort. So we came up with an organization chart. Engineers love their flow charts. So in a lot of respects, we're carrying on with DMV Moves. Many of you might have been involved with the task force, with the advisory groups, with the various working groups. And we have a parallel structure continuing on. So if you read from the bottom up, at the bottom are the subject matter expert working groups. So these are transit staff from across the region meeting to discuss bus stops and customer information, the bus priority network, service guidelines and performance metrics, and also joint procurement. And there we sort of get into including procurement officials as well. So those 4 groups existed in a form underneath DMV Moves. Now it's basically local government and transit staff who are working on these 4 working groups, and they'll be bringing their information together. In addition, off to the right, the green boxes, Metro is leading efforts in fare integration, working with the regional smart trip group, which has been around for, I think, 27 years or something. And also Metro's particular concerns on training and certification. The work of those groups is flowing up then to the sort of lead transit manager at each either agency or jurisdiction, and that's the coordination group. And what we've developed, though it hasn't actually met yet, is that sometime in the coming months, we hope to convene a meeting of the executive group. And this will be a meeting of the county and city transportation executives and transit agency executives. Because again, this is a staff function. To get anything done, our executives need to approve and give us guidance and break down the barriers. And so we'll pull all those people together here at COG or virtually to put our work effort together. We will then bring the information back to you all, the elected boards and councils, as well as the Metro Board of Directors, the Council of Governments Board of Directors, and the Transportation Planning Board. So I just wanted to give you that picture, if you could see how the information is being developed and will flow up to you eventually for your review and guidance. So what are staff doing? What is COG TPB staff? And sometimes we're multi-hatted here. We're working very closely with our friends at Washington Metro. Together, I'm on the phone or talking to them or emailing them, I think hourly throughout the day. We're working on the implementation of this regional integration action plan. So the key step for this first year, the focus is identifying the key tasks and schedule. Do we all agree what the action steps are? What should be done? How do we resolve them? We're bringing in the working groups from across the region, transit planners of all types, transit operators. Is this what we need to do? How do we move this forward? And then again, that coordination group as we start to take information and action steps and bring it up for approval. And again, the coordination group is sort of key to this. The lead transit planner for a jurisdiction or city, bringing in their bus priority expert, bringing in their fare person, bringing in their service guidelines and performance measurement person. How is this all going to fit together for a region? Are we doing what we all agree is right for the region? How do we get back to that happy customer experience that Tom talked about? So what we're asking of our partners, of course, is a lot of time, resources, and funding. To implement all these regional integration actions, it's not particularly easy. Some of them require changes in processes. Some of them have costs, in some cases, significant costs. All of them will take up a lot of staff time. So we're looking for everybody's commitment, participation, and responsivity to information requests. And I always think of this as the three musketeers. It's got to be all for one and one for all to make this effective. So now I'll step into each of the 6 action areas. Again, I'll try to move through them quickly in the interest of your time, even though I'm told that we have a little extra time to take up with this agenda item since we're ahead of schedule, but I'll try to be reasonably efficient. So the biggest kind of question mark out of DMV moves, to my mind, was this regional bus priority network. A lot of effort went into what is the future for transit in the region? How do we grow the system to address those congestion concerns our chair just brought up a few minutes ago? How do we get more people on transit, relieve some crowding on Metro Rail, connect people to opportunities, jobs, amenities? So DMV Moves went through a big staff exercise and came up with 7 corridors that you see on the map there. Essentially 3 in Maryland, 2 in DC, and 2 in Virginia. So again, these are cross-state boundary lines. So please don't focus too much on, is there one right where I want it? These 7 corridors are not necessarily new. Some of them have been lines on a map for decades. Work has been ongoing, for instance, on Virginia 7 for at least 15 years. The Northern Virginia Transportation Commission continues to advance the planning for that route. We see it as key. It joins up with corridors in Alexandria, West End Transitway, Duke Street Transitway, along Columbia Pike in Arlington, and then across the 14th Street Bridge, which is a sort of the new element into DC, and then the Crosstown BRT and so forth. I could go on with more time, but I'll move on. So DMV Moves considered a funding proposal to implement this network. That proposal was not accepted by the task force, but the idea was advanced. So staff are working to identify how can this regional bus priority network plan be implemented. So first thing is, who's actually doing what? Roles and responsibilities. Breaking down each corridor into its different segments and projects. Because again, in some cases, these are linking together pieces of work that have been in progress for years, even decades. Determining realistic outcomes and performance targets. What can we actually achieve? Or indeed, what aspirationally do we want to achieve? And some people like to use the phrase bus rapid transit, dedicated lanes, running each direction, bus only, red paint, attractive buses, high frequency service. That's the aspiration. But any steps we can make to really provide priority for our buses can really bring us great benefits in our regional transit network. And in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to have little consultants do a little study on what would be the benefits and impacts if we can do that, what we can do in the next 6 to 8 years. And then what if we had that sort of aspirational system? and we'll bring those results back to the board at some point. So the implementation issues to address, this word got changed on me to multiple. There's simply too many to list. But besides funding, of course, it's who's doing what are the trade-offs, who's going to make decision on whether a lane should be general purpose automobile, peak period for buses, or 24/7 for buses. What will it be? And the question is, who's going to do it? Who's going to make decision? So all these things are going to bubble up as we continue to work on this network plan over this year and indeed for the next 6 to 8 years if we continue following the DMV Moves plan. Continuing on, regional service guidelines and performance measures. So this actually goes back to that customer experience. When we talk to customers and when we talk to some of the government's funding transit, they're like, how do we know if we're doing a good job? What is a good job? How often should the bus come? What should its performance be in travel time, on-time performance, its reliability, in cleanliness, everything else. So we're looking at the different guidelines out there. Many agencies have had guidelines for years or even longer, but we're trying to come up with a set that's a little more consistent and common across the region. So we're talking again to all the local transit agencies as well as the local state and governments, which in some cases adopt or set those guidelines. And again, states have led the effort on this, so Department of Rail and Public Transportation in Virginia or Maryland Transit Administration. They have their views. There's some FTA guidelines. If you get down even to federal requirements for Title VI, how do we all bring these together? And right now, people are in a little different place. So we're trying to come up with that common set. What's the window for an on-time bus? Is it if the bus is 5 minutes late isn't on time, or 3 minutes late, or 7 minutes late? Everybody has sort of a different window. We want to try to reach a little more consistency on those. And the goal is that we'll develop a database, collect that information, and then we'll start reporting on this. We have our State of Public Transportation report. The 2024 report is available now. We're working on the 2025 report. We've had that going on for almost a decade now, trying to summarize sort of the accomplishments and what's being done in public transportation across the region. But now we're going to move into more of the comparative performance. How many passengers is each system carrying for every bus trip, every bus hour, every bus mile? What are some of the operating expenses, everything else? So the question is always about what's information that we can collect that's consistent, because we don't want to compare apples and oranges. How do we integrate it with all these state, federal, local requirements? And how do we present the data in a report? And there's a lot of concern that we want to provide the right context for this region. Sometimes I go out and I see a bus go by and it's empty. Well, maybe it only started its trip a minute ago and it hasn't picked anybody up. But other times when I get on the bus like I did today, it's full of people. So we want to provide the right context so people see what the buses are doing, why bus service is out there. Not every bus service is run strictly for efficiency. Sometimes it's set up for various other political or public policy reasons. So we want to be able to provide that context and story as well. All right, clicker, here we go. Fair policy and implementation. So COG and TPB staff are not so involved in this one. Metro is really leading this group with the existing regional smart trip group. Some very specific actions did come out of DMV Moves, a universal transfer credit. So when I get on a vehicle A and then I get off vehicle A and get on vehicle B, if I paid anything on vehicle A, it's credited towards my trip on vehicle B. We don't have that right now or across different modes, like say commuter bus or commuter rail and metro rail. We do have it for buses, and actually now many of the local bus services are free, but we want to provide that universal transfer credit. So somebody is coming in from Loudoun County and then getting on metro rail downtown for 2 stops, they get credited for their first trip. Other actions are making buses free for use 18 and under, sort of an aspirational stretch goal, but it would really simplify all the administration we do for student passes and having students carry passes around and having governments buy student passes on the transit system and everything else. Wouldn't it be great if we just made it 18 and under? And hey, 18 and under, they're not driving, or they typically aren't. Why don't we provide them the mobility? If they get off school and they want to go to the mall, great. I think they should be able to do it. My kids are still 10, so I have a few years to wait. Maybe my mind will change in a few years. Anyway, other fare products, making regional transit pass product, so it works across all modes. Again, starting bus and metro with Smart Trip, but hopefully soon, someday expanding to the commuter rail, commuter bus services. And of course, low income fare discount programs for those who can't afford the current fares, which can be pretty pricey, especially if you're taking a commuter service, providing regional buy down for low income fares for people who qualify under certain criteria. So standardizing that all across the region. So the question for all of this is, what would it take in terms of the timeline for agencies to do these things? First, they have to get approval. They need to study the revenue impacts. Can they actually implement it technologically? What are the costs and capabilities? We've had Smart Trip in this region for over a quarter century. I still can't use it on VRE, but I'd like to. So how can we move forward? And of course, someday Smart Trip cards may move off, into ancient history. A lot of transit agencies are moving away from those. But how can we make regional fare policy and implementation better? Bus stop amenities. Again, most people in the region touch a bus stop at some point. Bus stops can be a little confusing. Our favorite photo taken by one of my colleagues is there from a bus stop in Arlington. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different signs to look at to figure out which bus comes there and to find out more detailed information. Looking at 8 different signs seems a little confusing, particularly if you haven't been to this particular bus stop before and not exactly sure where you're going. So it is, how can we make it simpler? In addition, I will give a lot of credit to Metro implementing the Better Bus Network last June, July. Big, huge effort for them. They put up temporary signs as they restructured, renamed all the routes. Now they've got to go out and replace all those temporary signs with permanent ones. So there's a lot of action at Metro behind the scenes right now to, hey, what are we going to do with the permanent signs? How do we get them all out there? If we put them out, do we also put local bus information on them? So there's been a lot of work on that behind the scenes, too much for even me to follow. But it's something we want to do for region. What we want to have is sort of a universal set of bus stop design guidelines, so everybody has a consistent experience. You walk up to a bus stop, no matter where you are in the region, it should have some really basic information. The route that stops there, a number, a web address, a real-time system to get information on when the next bus will come, possibly a ride guide with a printed schedule, all those things. We want to figure out how to provide that consistent experience across the region. We want to collect that data. Metro has actually been working on a regional bus stop database, which then hopefully everybody in the region, all the agencies will be able to use. So if somebody in Montgomery County calls in and says, hey, somebody, my bus stop got, something happened to it, it needs to be fixed. Metro and Montgomery County staff can look in the database. A private partner can look in the database. Metro can look in the database. They can resolve that information. Similarly, digital IDs. We don't need 8 or 3 or 2 different digital IDs for every stop. If everybody's using a harmonized digital ID system, then anybody can go into a computer and look what the next bus is coming to stop 1, 2, 3, 4, as opposed to when does A come to 1, 2, 3, 4, and when does B come to 5, 6, 7, 8, even though they're the same geographic location. Sorry, getting a little engineering there otherwise. But we want to make things easier for the customers. Again, customers don't want 5 different phone numbers to call, 3 different web addresses to check, 4 different apps on their phone if they have that to look it up. Don't want to have to flip back and forth to see which bus will be first for them. Make the information more consistent, cohesive, collective as possible. Joint procurement, big COG action for many years. COG doing joint procurement on behalf of our members. Moving more into the transit scheme, we're trying to pull this together more for the region. I'll step back and say that the states have traditionally been leaders in this area. Virginia and Maryland have both led efforts to synchronize transit procurement within their states. But there are some aspects that are particular to a region. It's not just about buying things. Sometimes it's about buying services. So if we want to contract a tow operator that can pick up anybody's broken down bus at the Pentagon, and 5 agencies serve the Pentagon, we don't want to necessarily be on the same contract that Bristol or Hampton Roads are. maybe it makes more sense to contract with the people in our region. Similarly, if we're 3 or 4 bus operators in the region are buying the same bus, hey, let's just have one stock of spare parts. Let's have one technician to come in and help our systems. If we buy things that are the same, we can achieve operational savings, some cost efficiencies there. And if we procure things jointly, hey, it's not just one operator going out for 10 buses or 10 widgets, but now it's 100 buses or 1,000 widgets. Hey, economies of scale, might get a better deal, better responsiveness from the equipment manufacturer. So we have a clearinghouse that's up there now, putting data together. We're still having some problems with it not making it through some people's firewalls, but we're starting to collect information. Once we sort of get the contracts that are out there together, the next step would be looking at some of those contractual requirements. A lot of jurisdictions have their own procurement processes, very specific clauses, requirements they might have. But is there a way we can fold those into a regional procurement? Because again, if we can get those economies of scale, better deal with the manufacturer, maybe it's worth waiving a few of those requirements. So we're collecting that contract data. We've got to figure out some of those technical challenges of the database and listserv management and navigate all those things to put together an effective joint procurement effort. So I am wrapping up here. If I can get the next slide to pop up there. There we go. So just very briefly mentioning those other 2 working groups, shared training. Metro is going to be leading this effort. They're still sort of figuring out where they want to go. They're going to kick off the working group in summer 2026. And then again, Metro is also looking at the consistent reporting opportunities as they deal with many people who are interested in various pieces of information from them, how to put those all together in just one set of information. So, and we hope to have information to share with you at a future date. So final slide, thank you for bearing with me. We'll be coming back to you. Tom will be back, I'll be back, maybe someone else. As we reach consensus and some of these detailed work products are completed, we'll brief the TPB on the significant parts. One specific requirement item in the DMV Moves plan and included in the resolution the TPB adopted was those regional service guidelines. So that working group is meeting like every other week. So we hope to have something for you June or certainly by July on this regional service guidelines. Then bus priority network plan. I think a lot of folks will be interested in that, looking to have an initial draft to share with you by October. Another requirement specifically to the TPB staff as well was to have an annual progress report. So we're going to try to come up with that initial progress report. May not answer everybody's questions the first go round, but we want to be able to produce something by October, November, get it to you certainly before the end of the year on what's been happening in this first year of the DMV News effort. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation and Tom and I can answer any questions.
Thanks, Eric and Tom. That was quite a good presentation and it's much appreciated. One quick question. Now that most, or at least many of the bus networks have stopped collecting fares, has that made it more difficult to track how much ridership there is on these networks?
I would say professionally, no. A lot of systems have moved to what are called APCs or automated passenger counters. So either physical or infrared sensors that can track people actually getting on and off buses. In addition, bus operators are usually instructed to push a function key on their fare system or the fare system that's still there to track the number of people boarding. But I know when I get on Dash, a lot of people, Dash has been free now for 5 years. You can get on and off the rear door. So some of those counts may be missed, but statistically, we have a pretty good idea. We may not, get the exact number on every bus, but the error is pretty low when you add all the information together for a region. So I think we are confident about that.
All right, that's great to hear. All right, opening it up to the rest of the board and attendees. Are there any questions or comments from any jurisdiction?
I don't see anybody on the chat with their hands raised.
All right, well, Obviously, a very thorough presentation, and you've answered all the questions up front. Thank you very much, gentlemen. All right, and for our last agenda item, we have the transportation reauthorization status of the federal process and the review of the Basics Act. It's a very important item as it directly concerns us as a regional body, our role, responsibility, and funding moving forward. We'll recognize Ms. Katie Economou from the National Association of MPOs to brief us on this important topic. Katie?
Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. Thanks for having us and also for all the work that you all do in your communities every day. I'm Katie Economou. I'm the Legislative Director here at the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations, or AMPO for short. I'm also joined by Ryan Cody, our Legislative Associate, and by Ben Gilsdorf from the National Association of Counties. And today we're going to walk through the Basics Act, what it is, what it means for you and your communities, especially as we're heading into the next federal surface transportation bill. And to kick us off, I'm actually going to turn it over to Ryan so he can give a little bit of background about where we're at in the process.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having us here today. And also thank you, Katie, for that introduction. I'm Ryan Cody. I'm the Legislative Associate here at AMPO. Very quickly, we just wanted to talk a little bit about what federal transportation funding looks like, what surface transportation reauthorization is, and then ultimately where the Basics Act sort of fits into this conversation of reauthorization. To really understand federal transportation funding, it's important to understand what the Highway Trust Fund is. And the Highway Trust Fund is the main source by which federal transportation funding flows, specifically through its two main accounts. The first being the highway account, which funds highway projects, bridges, and general roadway infrastructure projects, and then the mass transit account, which supports public transit systems across the country. The Highway Trust Fund is then primarily funded through federal gas and diesel taxes, but these rates have not changed since the 1990s. This has resulted in this widening gap between the amount of revenue that the Highway Trust Fund brings in and the amount of expenses that it sees and the transportation needs that it has to address. As a result, Congress has had to supplement the Highway Trust Fund in order to ensure that it is not insolvent. But nevertheless, the Highway Trust Fund is a critical source of federal transportation funding for MPOs, allowing them to receive planning dollars as well as deliver federal transportation projects. And you can head to the next slide. Thank you. Sort of speaking about these programs, some of the key federal programs that MPOs rely on include metropolitan planning, or often referred to as PL. This helps support MPO planning activities as well as fund things like federal transportation studies, MPO staff, and long-range transportation planning efforts by MPOs. MPOs are also able to receive suballocation MPOs receive suballocated funding as well through specific programs. This includes the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, the Most Flexible Formula Program, helping fund things like road, bridge, and multimodal projects, as well as programs that address transportation-related emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. Those are the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program, or a lot shorter, CMAQ, and the Carbon Reduction Program, CRP. And then lastly, the Transportation Alternatives Program, which, as the name suggests, helps fund projects that are non-motorized focused, focusing on bicycle or pedestrian-specific infrastructure. And also, MPOs are able to receive funding through discretionary grant programs. This can be programs like BUILD or RAISE, as it was referred to, the Safe Streets for All program, and SMART grants. Discussing all these federal transportation programs, it's kind of a good segue into what reauthorization is, as federal transportation funding is reauthorization is the process where federal transportation funding levels for these programs or other federal transportation programs are set and where the policies can be impacted. For MPOs as well, reauthorization influences how much funding they receive and the policies they have to abide by. And you can head to the next slide. Great, and sort of zooming out for a second, reauthorization is really this process that shapes the federal transportation landscape. It influences where funding flows and what funding levels we see, how decision-making occurs and what policies are set, and then ultimately how projects are delivered. You can head to the next slide. Great, thank you. This process happens every 5 to 6 years, with the most recent iteration of the bill being the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, that was passed in 2021. That bill is set to expire on September 30th of this year, meaning that Congress is already well on their way to working on the next version of the bill. Specifically in Congress, the committees that work on this include the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, who do the majority of the House version of the bill. And then on the Senate side, we actually see it divided between 3 different committees, with the Environment and Public Work Committee, or EPW, handling the highway portion and the largest portion of the bill, but transit provisions falling under the Senate Banking's jurisdiction, and then the Senate Commerce Committee having jurisdiction over general research and safety provisions. You can head to the next slide. Great, thank you. And then over time, we've seen many iterations of the Surface Bill, with each one introducing different funding levels and different policies. Very similarly, for MPOs, since they've been first established in the 1960s, we've seen their role and responsibilities in our communities grow. For example, from the list that we have here, in the 1990s, we saw a greater focus on multimodalism. In 2012, the introduction of performance metrics. And then, of course, with the IIJA, we saw this historic increase in federal transportation funding, as well as an expansion of MPO eligibility for different competitive grant programs, which I'll actually pass it back to Katie to talk a little bit more about.
Thanks so much, Ryan. And you can jump to the next slide there. Thank you. So jumping to where we're at today, as Ryan mentioned, the current law is, I'll keep the acronym short, the IIJA, which made a big shift by expanding competitive or discretionary grant programs. And that opened new doors for local governments and regions to apply directly for funding. And that was intentional because for years we heard that funding wasn't reaching communities in a meaningful way. And IIJA was really helpful because it expanded those funding opportunities for locals. Under the previous law, which is the FAST Act, there was about $5.5 billion in competitive funding. Under the IIJA, that jumped to roughly $28 billion. But communities still ran into challenges with those competitive grant programs for things like high local match requirements, usually set at 20%, the time and cost to simply apply. We heard pulling together an application and aligning with the requirements could cost local governments and regions upwards to $30,000 to $60,000 in some cases. There was also a lot of uncertainty with actually receiving an award after putting all those resources in, and also just general delays in getting programs out the door from USDOT. So while opportunities for local funding improved under the IIJA, it hasn't always been easy to use because of those barriers to access, especially for smaller and rural communities. And that's really the key question going into the next bill. How do we make funding more accessible, predictable, and usable for communities on the local level? You can jump to the next slide there. So with all that context, Congress is now working on the next federal surface transportation reauthorization bill, with the current law, the IIJA, expiring in September 2026. We could see a markup of the next surface bill late this month or potentially even early in May. The Basics Act, it fits into this reauthorization process as what's called a marker bill. And a marker bill is designed to shape the conversation surrounding reauthorization early and make sure that local priorities are a part of the next law. The Basics Act was introduced on a bipartisan basis on the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee by Representative Kristen McDonald-Rivet and Representative Rob Bresnahan. But for it to have impact, it still needs support, especially from local leaders like all of y'all in the room today. So your voice here in this reauthorization process really matters. And with that, I'll actually pass it back over to Ben from the National Association of Counties to walk through how the Basics Act actually came together and what we're hearing from Congress about how the next bill might take shape.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. For those of you I have never met, my name is Ben Gilsdorf. I'm with the National Association of Counties. We're just right across the street on North Capitol. We represent the 3,069 counties, boroughs, and parishes in the United States, and we're proud to work with partners like AMPO in the LOT Coalition, or the Local Officials in Transportation Coalition. I have been at NACO for about 14 months now, but this has been my first surface transportation reauthorization bill as a part of this coalition. But from what I've heard, this is the most coordinated and most united all the different local government and local organization groups have been in pushing for our priorities together as locals, rather than being divided as cities versus towns versus counties versus MPOs. We've all been singing from the same sheet of music, and that's allowed us to get further than we've ever gotten before. The way we can really see that is through the Basics Act, or the Bridges and Safety Infrastructure for Community Success Act. This is a bill that was put together in close coordination with all of the groups to try to do what Katie said, of ensure that local governments have more access to federal formula transportation dollars in partnership with their regional planning organizations. We wanted to write a bill that was responsive to what we were hearing out of Capitol Hill about where they wanted the bill to go, while also being true to our priorities of making sure that local input, local control, planning were central to how that was achieved. So you can see all the groups there at the bottom that have endorsed it, but it includes AMPO, the National Association of Regional Councils, the League of Cities, the Conference of Mayors, NACO, the National Association of Development Organizations, which largely represents in the transportation space, the rural transportation planning organizations, the National Association of County Engineers, and the Association of, the American Public Works Association. It's not just endorsed by national organizations, though. Something I wanted to really hit on is that in conjunction with the League of Cities, I worked with my colleague over there to get a statement of support from a state association of counties, or state municipal league, from all 50 states. So from Hawaii down to Florida, Alaska to Maine, local governments and their state associations support this piece of legislation because it would increase access to formula dollars for their members. We can go to the next slide. So one thing I mentioned is that we really wanted to be working in lockstep with what the desires were on the administration from leadership for the next bill. And Chairman Graves, pictured there on the left, said that they really wanted to go back to basics in this bill. IIJA was very expansive. There were a lot of programs for a lot of different eligibilities, which was great in some ways if you had a discrete project that may not have qualified for funding previously. Maybe now there was a grant program to do just that. But we know that there was a lot of administrative overhead as a part of that. It was difficult for folks to navigate, especially some of our more capacity constrained organizations. And so his focus was really to shrink the scope of the bill, not necessarily the size of it, but we're going to have fewer discretionary grant programs. We're not going to do as many unique buckets for different categories of projects. We're really going to focus on roads, bridges, highways, the core infrastructure, and we're going to work to try to get it out as quickly as possible through the formula, rather than doing things through all these grant programs that require applications from applicants and then a lot of deliberation at the DOT level. So that's what the chairman wanted, and our goal was to align what we were asking for with that. The problem that we faced, and I'll talk a little bit more about it on the next slide, is that fundamentally moving towards more of a formula model doesn't necessarily, at face value, work for locals. So we can go to the next slide. As you can see, local governments, and you all know this anecdotally too, we own a significant share of infrastructure in the United States. 75% of all road miles are owned by local governments. But if we just want to talk about what's in sort of the quote unquote federal interest, what should the federal government be prioritizing during this bill? Which, we can debate whether or not that's an effective way to look at it, but that's certainly something we hear a lot from partners on Capitol Hill. Local governments, cities and counties, own 43% of the federal aid highway system. So we own a very significant share of mileage that is deemed to be in the federal interest. But the funding that we receive through the formula to maintain and upgrade those road miles is about 16%. So we have to do 43% of federal aid highway miles with 16% of money. That is an imbalance where the responsibilities we have aren't being matched by the resources that are being given to us. And as a result, we see chronic underinvestment on locally owned roads and bridges. That, you know, I work in NACO. I don't believe it's due to any fault of our own. We've been dealt a difficult hand. And so when we're looking at an approach that's going to be heavy on formula funding, but we see that 84-16 split, putting more money into a formula that's only going to give locals access to 16% of dollars when we previously had access to, I believe the number was 24% of dollars, that's going to be a real problem. And we can go to the next slide, and Katie has a good little chart showing this. But under IIJA, you know, even if we didn't necessarily win 25% of dollars, those were grants that we could apply to, and there was at least on paper access. But if all that goes away and we just continue with the current breakdown of programs, sub-allocation percentages, we go from 25 to 16, about 9 percentage points, but that's almost a 50% drop in access to whole dollar amounts in the next bill. So that is something we wanted to avoid. And so, you know, if Congress is going to go in this direction with formula, then we need to make reforms to formula to get that 16% number a little higher. So let's go to the next page to talk specifically about what those changes look like in the Basics Act. Probably going to flip the order here a little bit on its head, but from the county perspective, what we want to make sure is that construction and capital dollars remain accessible to us if we can't go out and compete for them through a grant process. And so STBG has largely been the way that that's been made possible through its sub-allocation mechanism. STBG is a great program. It has a lot of eligibilities. It can do a variety of projects, and it benefits states and localities alike. We know from some data that we've looked at that states actually like to transfer money into STBG because of how flexible it is. We like STBG because it provides access to funding. So we, in the Basics Act, would grow access to STBG so that states and localities benefit, more money is put into the most flexible pot, and that we can ensure that the formula program that really has worked best for us is grown. That model of sub-allocating that is done in STBG, it's not perfect, but it is the best way of ensuring that communities throughout a state have access to dollars through their planning organizations. And so we're going to take, in the Basics Act, we take that approach of doing regional sub-allocation and expanding it to other programs that we believe have a key local nexus. So the Highway Safety Improvement Program is one of those. We know that there are many roadway fatalities and accidents and crashes that happen off the interstate highway system. Local leaders many times know best where there's an unsafe intersection, where there's a project that could meaningfully save lives. But formula funding for safety projects has really not been accessible at the local level. Safe Streets and Roads for All has been amazing for that. But since there is so much talk about moving away from grants into a formula space, we wanted to make sure that we had a formula backstop on the safety side. So we would structure HSIP a little more like STBG to allow organizations like the COG to be able to tap into those dollars and work with local governments to solicit and fund safety projects at the local level. The same would be true for bridge dollars. So under IIJA, there was a significant investment in bridges because bridges are, I like to say, you can drive over a pretty bad road, but once a bridge gets bad, you want to steer clear. And so it was phenomenal to see explicit funding for bridge projects, but that funding largely went to states with only a small off-system bridge set-aside requirement that many times people conflate to be a locally owned bridge set-aside, but there are quite a few states where states own off-system bridges, and there are many examples where local governments own on-system bridges that aren't eligible for that set-aside, but the money isn't going to us. And often those are the most expensive bridges. And so there's kind of a donut hole there that can be plugged with STBG dollars, but it created a lot of headaches for local governments to figure out, hey, I own this $20, $30 million bridge, it needs repair. What's the federal funding I can tap into there? So instead of doing that 15% set aside, which had very little project selection language in there to ensure that local governments could meaningfully compete for those dollars, this would be that STBG style sub-allocation of bridge dollars, not at a 15% clip, but 25%. Because when we look at bridge ownership numbers, Counties, we own 38% of all bridges nationwide, but we actually own an outright majority of poor condition bridges. County owned and locally owned bridges generally are more than twice as likely to be in poor condition on the national bridge inventory than state owned bridges. So that's something that needs to be addressed. And we can't take a holistic approach to fixing our bridges if we're only doing it based on this arbitrary sort of on-off system approach. That's not the best way to do it. So from the county side, that bridge piece is something I'm certainly really excited about. We know that we can't do this all on our own. It's very important to have MPOs and other planning organizations in rural areas to be strong partners in this because of the expertise and the capacity that you have. But I know from our side, I hear from county leaders about how they want to work with their MPO to implement these federal dollars, but they're on the MPO board, but they feel like they need a little more help. And so empowering further MPOs and giving them the resources they really need to succeed was sort of the key that unlocks for the county side all of the great new access to funding that the Basics Act would provide. So Katie, maybe I'll kick it back to you so that I don't try to do my best impression of an MPO lobbyist to talk about some of the great stuff in there for MPOs in the Basics Act, not just for MPO's sake, but really for the sake of all of their members.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can shift to the next slide. And before we touch on some of the MPO pieces as well, I do want to flag that the goal of the Basics Act, too, is to strengthen the entire system across all levels by directing more funding into programs that better address those real world needs that Ben was getting at, while also ensuring that both interstate and local systems are well supported. So under the Basics Act, both states and local formula funding increases by about $5 billion respectively. It's also important to understand that it's a forward-looking bill based on fiscal year 2027 funding assumptions. So it reflects that direction that Congress is headed in that Ben flagged on the Chairman Graves slide earlier. So we're predicting that overall funding levels would be around $80 billion for the Highway Trust Fund, inflation adjustments roughly around 2%, and also that shift from competitive or discretionary programs to formula funding that Ben got at. And on that last point too, we expect many of those discretionary programs to be consolidated into formula. The Basics Act accounts for this by assuming that those programs previously accessible to local and regional partners will be channeled through formula programs that include suballocation to local areas. So Ben flagged the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, the New Bridge Formula Program, and also HSIP, which we'll touch more on. We can jump to the next slide. I forgot we have one more before the MPO stuff. So at a high level, the key here is making sure that the shift from competitive to formula programs happens, local access is not lost, and that funding will continue to reach communities in a reliable way. So again, states and locals would both see a guaranteed formula increase around $5 billion each under Basics. More formula funding would flow through flexible and safety-focused programs. And there's also that dedicated support for local technical assistance and local planning capacity. So the overall takeaway is that the system is strengthened across the board. Next slide. Here we are. So a key piece of this bill is making it easier for communities to plan and move projects forward. Planning is how local priorities become real projects, but right now it can be really hard to access those funds. Historically, we know that less than 0.5% of funds are dedicated to planning. So this hasn't kept pace with the growing federal responsibilities placed on regions that Ryan flagged in that reauthorization history slide, or with inflation, or with the complexity of the transportation system. So the bill tries to make a couple practical changes here. It increases local planning funds, and really importantly, it eliminates the local match for planning funds. For many communities, especially smaller or rural areas, that 20% match is a real barrier. And since planning is federally required, it definitely should not be an added burden on local government budgets. And we know in some places that state departments of transportation might cover the full match, but in many areas across the US, that's not always the case, and it can create a major strain on local communities. And also the bill gives the option to receive local planning funds directly to help streamline the funding process. This is completely voluntary though, but in places where state pass-through processes can slow things down, it can help communities access funding faster to keep those projects moving. The bill also expands on what planning funds can be used for. So things like local technical support, modeling and data, transportation studies tied to things like economic development and housing. For the MWashCog region too, under the Basics Act, more funding could go to support current technical assistance programs like the Regional Roadway Safety Program, I think the Transportation Land Use Connections Program, and also the Transit Within Reach program technical assistance as well. So that's exciting. The bill would also improve transparency so you can better track project status for obligation and plan with more confidence, knowing exactly how much funding is coming to your area and avoid some of those unnecessary delays we were discussing. And at the end of the day, this is all about making sure that local priorities don't get stuck and that local governments have the tools to move projects forward working with their MPOs. You can jump to the next slide there. Thank you. And as Ben touched on safety, more funds are directed to the Highway Safety Improvement Program for both states and locals. It includes a dedicated 25% suballocation, local share of safety funding for communities. And as Ben mentioned, it's distributed on population, much like how the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program functions. And we know that many communities have already received planning grants through programs like Safe Streets and Roads for All, or SS4A. And now they're kind of ready to move into the implementation phase of those programs. So this funding would help bridge that gap so that projects you've already planned for can actually move forward with more certainty on the local level. And the bill also requires that local safety funding or local safety needs need to be considered before funding can be moved anywhere else by states. So overall, this is about making sure that communities have the resources to follow through on safety investments and deliver improvements on the ground. And this is super important because we know there are major safety challenges on local roads, which Ben mentioned. I think about 85% of roadway fatalities happen off the interstate. So it's a really big issue. And I'll kick it back to Ben to discuss more details on the bridge program and how that functions as well. But I think we already touched on some of this.
Yeah, I got a little ahead of myself, but I'll come back to it. I get too excited talking about bridges. So the goal here is really to keep what the good momentum that started under IIJA with its bridge formula program, but just make the process work a little better for localities. So again, those on-system locally owned bridges are something that have really given my members headaches. I think there's a desire, off-system bridges are definitely a problem in rural counties, but even there are on-system locally owned bridges. And so rather than doing this set-aside model that largely cut localities out of the project selection process, it depended largely on what your state did. So some states I know cut them into the process. Others, there was no requirement at the federal level for local consultation. And so we wanted to change that with the program going forward. So we gave it a fun little new title in the Basics Act, the Strengthening Bridge Formula Program. But a lot of what you'll see in there is similar to IIJA. It's got the same minimum amount for states so that folks aren't moving backwards. Same top line funding levels of the program, but really it's that 25% SDBG style suballocation as opposed to a set aside model that makes the difference. I think the goal here was to try to correct some of those disparities that we see in local ownership. I mentioned that 2 times as likely, the locally owned bridges are 2 times as likely to be in poor condition, which is a real problem for overall connectivity of a system. If you have great bridges in one system and poor bridges on another, then a system is only as strong as its weakest link. And so the hope here is to empower organizations like MPOs to work with my members and with cities to say what bridges could use federal investment the most, what have been really hard for you to fund ordinarily, who cares if it's on or off system, how can we tackle it through our federal dollars. Katie, was that hopefully not too repetitive and shed some light into sort of the thinking there?
I thought it was great. Thanks, Ben. And we can jump to the next slide. So wrapping up here, now to how you can engage with the Basics Act. So local elected officials are some of the most effective voices on Capitol Hill, and your perspective here carries real weight. We've made it easy for you to get involved with the Basics Act, and you don't have to start anything from scratch here. We have a toolkit that includes templates, talking points, sample letters that you can use right away, and there's a QR code in the top right that will direct you straight to that toolkit. I also want to flag some quick, simple tips on local advocacy for board members, and I'm sure Ben can add more to this, but always meet with your congressional offices, speak about how the Basics Act would make improvements specifically within your communities. You can share real examples of projects or impacts in your community. For example, if you're talking about safety funding for local projects, you could discuss something specific in your region that's a real challenge and how having more dedicated funds coming down to the local level would help you move the needle in the right direction there. And of course, always coordinate with your partners to help present a unified message when MPOs, cities, counties, regional councils, rural communities speak with one voice. It's super impactful on the Hill. And at the end of the day, what resonates most are real local stories of what's working, what's needed, and also what's at stake here. And we're always here to support you, whether if it's providing materials, helping with messaging, joining meetings. Always feel free to reach out to me, Ben, or Ryan. We're all here for support. And I think that wraps it up. We're happy to answer any questions. And thanks again, everyone, for having us on and also for all of your leadership.
All right, thanks very much, Katie and Ryan and Ben. Great presentation, very informative. Do we have any questions from any jurisdiction? All right, Bill Cutler.
Yes. Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. And of course, we're always very interested in more funding and how we can get that. I very much appreciate the presentation and support that. I just wanted to point one thing out. The numbers, of course, were presented on the national level. So no debate about that. But the one slide that had local governments having 43% of the federal aid highway system and 75% of the U.S. road miles, that I'm sure is not the case here in Virginia. Whereas, as our Virginia members know, that the Commonwealth of Virginia and VDOT is responsible for the vast majority of the roads and bridges in Commonwealth of Virginia, with the exception, of course, of the cities and 2 counties, Arlington and Henrico. We're actually the 3rd largest state-maintained roadway system in the country, behind Texas and North Carolina. So our team takes a lot of pride in that. And we'll continue to work with the local governments and the MPO to help secure the funding that we need for our region and our Commonwealth. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks, Bill. Any other questions or comments?
Snyder.
David Snyder.
Hi, I'm doing everybody a favor by not being on camera. I had a technology fail, but it actually benefits everyone. So my question for these presenters is, are you satisfied with the outcome so far? And if you are, we're fortunate to have an excellent congressional delegation here. Are there messages that you think the Council of Governments ought to do as a joint effort? Number one. And while I have the mic, I did attempt to comment on the prior presentation where we're talking about improvements to the bus system. And I would note that as we were presented at the COG board a week or so ago, people are still driving to a significant extent, even though that is the least satisfactory mode of transportation in the survey. So I'm hoping that the work that we're doing on the bus system will make it more attractive for more people. And a classic example is the metro system's acceptance of credit cards now to check in. Wonderful addition. So a comment on that, but I want to go back to the particular presentation that we just had. What more should we be doing and in support of the overall effort to get transportation funding across all modes? And let me talk about transit for a minute. What's the situation with transit funding? Thanks.
Katie, before you share your thoughts on what more we could do, just for the benefit of the TPB members, COG board has a legislative priorities document that the board adopts, and transportation is part of that. And the COG board reviewed the basics bill, and they have issued a letter of support for the basics bill that has been shared with the congressional delegation. So, thanks.
Thank you so much. And that's actually exactly what I would recommend. Letters from MPO policy boards are very impactful on the Hill. Also, let Ben answer more on the local elected official side, but we know some specific communities are also doing their own letters, which can be really helpful. And also just continuing to beat the drum within your own congressional delegation, letting them know why the Basics Act is important to your specific communities and the positive outcomes that can come from that. And to your question on transit funding, so the Basics Act is relatively quiet on transit funding, aside from the planning funds, which would also cover Section 5303, which is under the Federal Transit Administration title, which would allow for more planning on the transit side. But there's a specific reason for why the Basics Act doesn't cover transit completely. We tried to work through the highway side of the bill for this, and that's because many of those programs are already suballocated to regions and to local communities. Versus on the transit side, in many cases, the designated recipients of transit funds are transit agencies, and there's not always as much of a local role there. However, the LOT Coalition is fully supportive of full funded transit, and it's something I think every single one of our organizations within the LOT Coalition really cares about. And we want to do something meaningful in that space and be complementary and supportive of efforts underway there. And I'll let Ben add to that as well if I'm missing anything on that end.
Yeah, I think on the local government side, something that we're really focused on is making sure that across there's 3,069 counties, I think there's 17,000 cities and towns in the United States. It's very hard for us to all be sort of explicitly asking for the same things and showcasing a level of agreement across the country, whether that is a big city in Washington state or a small town in Florida. I think no matter the size or locality of your local government, talking about how this approach of putting more dollars into local control is something that will yield good results, even if what one community wants in one part of the country might not be what someone else wants in a different part. I think the approach of it's very hard to write one bill that works for 50 different states. We've learned that the hard way, but to say, hey, what this bill is getting, because even in the best case scenario, the bill text as it's currently written isn't going to just slot right into the reauthorization bill. It's got to fit in with hundreds of other puzzle pieces. Things get included, excluded. Maybe it's more the essence of the bill than it is the exact bill text. But to showcase and build as much support for the idea of local control and getting the number to, I always tell my members, I don't care if it's grants, formula funding, or a secret third way to fund transportation projects. We just need to make sure that our access is preserved. That's really the North Star that we're following. This is one way to do that. That's most responsive to what the chair is saying. But to drive home that point and build a really strong coalition of folks saying we have to increase local control in the next bill is a really strong message. And the local government stakeholders are ones that, at least I hope folks on the Hill really prioritize and listen to. And we don't want them to say, oh, well, I heard from some folks they want this and others they want that, and I couldn't really figure out where you landed, so I didn't do what you wanted. That's kind of our biggest fear. And so even when we have members of Congress on the bill, or even if someone from our district spoke in support of it, there's never enough support that we can have to make it abundantly clear where we lie and what we'd like to see for locals in the next bill.
So Chair, Jeff Anderson from MDOT has his hands raised.
All right, Jeff.
Thank you. Just curious about the total funding that the Basics Act assumes compared to IIJA.
So for the funding assumptions, right now we placed it at 80 billion for the Highway Trust Fund, and also included a 2% inflation adjustment, which would land around, I think, 2 billion. And then it also includes the assumption that competitive programs would likely be rolled into formula, and that those with local and regional access would be dumped into programs that are accessible by states and locals, so STBG, HSIP, and that includes the SS4A and Bridge Formula program pieces that we flagged.
So what does that make the total basics bill come in at compared to IIJA?
Well, so I think it's important to recognize basics doesn't have a top line. The math was done assuming a certain top line. I know you might not be asking that, but just for other folks on the call, it's not our, as much as I wish I got to determine the top line of the bill, we're just trying to use the context clues we've gotten from committee to sort of say, okay, everyone seems like people want HTF plus inflation and to consolidate grant opportunities from IIJA. So that was sort of the math that Katie was alluding to. But Katie, sorry, I cut you off there.
And to flag for that as well, since it is a marker bill and we don't know what the top line of the total reauthorization bill is going to be, if there were any changes that would allow anyone in any camp to lose funding, especially states, then we would obviously make changes to how we're going about that formula, because we want to make sure that all levels of government kind of like rise under this bill. So we're flexible there for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else have a question or comment? All right. Well, thank you again, Katie, Ryan, and Ben. Great presentation.
Thanks all.
Thank you so much.
That wraps up everything for today's meeting. Thanks all for your participation. Next in-person meeting is scheduled for May 20th. Enjoy the rest of your day and pay your taxes. Thanks, everyone.
We did